Unit 4, the 6 phases of the early church in the book of Acts, phases 4 through 6. We talked about the 6 phases that the book of Acts is divided into, and in the previous unit we looked at the first 3, in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and the first Gentile believers. And so in this unit we want to look at the other 3, and this is really where the focus goes on to the Apostle Paul. And so Paul really becomes the focus of our next 3 phases. So we see phase 4 is where we follow his first missionary journey into Asia Minor. Phase 5, we look at his second and third missionary journeys into Macedonia and Greece. And then finally, we see how Paul gets arrested and imprisoned and his journey from Jerusalem, Caesarea, and then to Rome, which is really his final missionary journey because he's always preaching and teaching, and he ends up doing so in Rome, and we'll look at all of that when we get to it here. So let's review these final 3 phases, 4 through 6 of the book of Acts. So phase 4 is into Asia Minor. So we're looking at Paul's first missionary journey, and this is where we read about it from Acts 12:25 through Acts 16:5. And so here we see Paul and Barnabas, they go into Asia Minor, they preach in synagogues, and they plant churches, and they encounter all kinds of Jewish opposition because they're preaching Christ in Jewish synagogues. And in every place they tend to go, there are people that they persuade, and there are definitely people that are completely against them. And we start to see this in phase 4 during Paul's first missionary journey. And here we also start to really see the breach between the Jewish believers and the Gentile believers continue to widen. So you have Jews who do not believe, you got some Jews who do believe, and then you have the Gentiles who are now being more and more and more included into the church because they are believing Paul's message about Christ. So as we look at this first missionary journey into Asia Minor, we can get a little bit of an animated view of it. And kind of where he went. And so we started from Antioch. We can see they went down to Cyprus and then up into Asia Minor, stopping and preaching in cities of Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, and then they end up going back to Antioch. So that's a quick flyover of Paul's first missionary journey, and that is phase 4 into Asia Minor, going from Acts 12:25 through Acts 16:5. We now go into phase 5. So we're now switching into this phase where we now go further beyond Asia Minor and into Macedonia and Greece. And so we are now looking at Paul's second and third missionary journeys. This is covered in Acts 16:6 through Acts 19:20. And here again, we see Paul taking the gospel back through Asia Minor, but further beyond Asia Minor and into Macedonia and Greece. He plants churches. He encounters opposition, some of the same things that happen. He persuades people to believe, and some people do not believe. But Paul is faithful to take the gospel into the areas that the Spirit is leading him. And so we see kind of an overview of where Paul goes on his second missionary journey. Starting in Antioch, again, he goes through a lot of the same towns that he had gone to previously on his first missionary journey, but this time he goes further up beyond Asia Minor into Macedonia, what we'd call Eastern Europe, down through Greece. We can see the cities of Athens and Corinth. Paul goes to the city of Ephesus and down to Jerusalem and ends up back in Antioch. And so that's his second missionary journey. And his third missionary journey is similar. We can see that one also. He begins in Antioch, again, goes back and visits some of the places that he has established churches where there are believers there. But the third missionary journey is different than the second. This time, again, going back up through Philippi, goes down to Corinth, but this time has to turn around and go back the other way because of opposition. And so, again, goes down back through Asia, through Ephesus. And then this time, Paul does not end up back in Antioch, because he is being led by the Spirit to go and preach in Jerusalem, and here is where he gets arrested and eventually taken to Rome. So that is phase 5, Paul's second and third missionary journeys, going into Macedonia and Greece, and that sets us up immediately to transition into our final phase of the book of Acts, and that is phase 6, where we have Paul imprisoned. And here we see Paul, he is arrested. When he goes down Jerusalem, he preaches in the synagogues, just as the apostles did. He ends up getting arrested, sent to Caesarea, and then ultimately sent to Rome as a prisoner. This is the longest of all the sections. This covers from Acts 19 through Acts 28, almost 9 full chapters. And they are amazing chapters where Paul goes before a lot of the same authorities that Jesus went before when he was arrested as well. And so, but Paul ultimately gets sent to Rome as a prisoner, and it is from Rome, and it is to the churches that he has planted and that he has been ministering to that are some of the treasures of the New Testament. So we'll get to all of where the books fall throughout this timeline as we unpack this a little bit more. But just looking at Paul's journey to Rome, he goes from Jerusalem up to Caesarea, and then we can see him kind of go across the sea, and then they get shipwrecked in a little island called Malta. And ultimately, after a very difficult journey, Paul makes it to Rome. So that is a quick flyover of the 6 phases of the book of Acts. We started in Jerusalem. We go to Judea and Samaria. We have the first Gentile believers. In phase 3, we have Paul's missionary journeys, his first one into Asia Minor, which is phase 4. We have into Macedonia and Greece, which is his second and third missionary journeys. And then as Paul gets imprisoned, Jerusalem, Caesarea, and Rome, which are his final missionary journeys. But that is not the full overview of the whole New Testament. So if we take the whole New Testament, the book of Acts covers a tremendous amount, but not the entire amount. So what else does the New Testament include that is not part of the book of Acts timeline? Well, we can actually see that if we kind of slide these around, after Paul, there are more New Testament books that are written. And then we have our final section, which is Revelation and future prophecy. And that really points ahead to the things that have not yet occurred but are promised and are parts of the New Testament writings. And so if we kind of space these out a little bit, we can see that these are our 8 full sections of the New Testament that we're going to use. The first 6 come directly from the book of Acts, and then we have some of the writings that come after Paul, and then we're looking those that look into the future of looking at the book of Revelation, as well as some of the prophecies that have yet to be fulfilled. So all of that is the overview of the book of Acts. And we want to go now, but as we go into the timeline now, we want to make sure that we pause first and examine this amazing idea of the coming of the Spirit, because it is really the Holy Spirit who is the leader of everything that we are about to go through and unpack. So if you would, join me in our next unit, which is Unit 5, as we examine the coming of the Spirit. The age of the church begins.